So today's brown bag is on Jet Reports. We are getting a little bit of feedback, so somebody, if you have called in, if you would mute yourself, please, that would be very helpful. Thank you. All right, so we're talking about Jet Reports. Jet Express is a feature that you get with your subscription to OneNFP Financials and Financials Lite. It's an add-in to Excel. It's a partnership that we have with a company called Jet Reports, and they actually have several levels of reporting tool. Express is the lowest level, so the features you have are somewhat basic. You can pursue increasing your subscription. It would be an additional cost, but there are more features, and some advanced reports you might want to look into that, and we can certainly work with you. So the first step that you're going to have would be to download Jet Express for Microsoft Dynamics NAV. Now, most of you are aware, it may not be topmost in your brain, but OneNFP Financials and Financials Lite is built onto Microsoft Dynamics NAV. So we take a Microsoft product and we build onto it. I wanted to make sure you were aware of that, partly so you know what you're looking for when you go out to Jet Express, but partly so you understand when you look at the how-to videos, the pre-built reports, the community that Jet Express has out there, these folks are using Dynamics NAV. So that is a slightly different product than what you use. There is going to be information out there that is still very useful to you. You just need to have in your mind an understanding that our product is a little different because it's built for nonprofits. All right, so your first step would be to download the Jet Express. When you do that, when you open up Jet or Excel, you're going to have a tab now called Jet, and this is going to give you the functionality to all your Jet pieces. So once you do that, your next step is going to be to define your data source settings. This is how you connect Excel to your database, your specific OneNFP Financials or Financials Lite database. There are only two pieces we need to define are on these two tabs. This would be your web address. This is 9116 or 9126, depending on whether you're Financials or Financials Lite. Generally, I have sent screenshots to clients with this information. With the upgrade and the change in URL, I may not have gotten everybody's out to them with updated information. So if I haven't, please let me know and I will get that to you. But this allows you to connect. You're going to have to define this for every user who is going to access the system. These can be limited users, though, but they need to be users in your OneNFP database, and then that would be their OneNFP username. So once you have that set up, you can go ahead and start creating your reports. What you use to do that are these functions up here. I will say I use exclusively Table Builder, and I'll show you why. You can use the function wizard. Some of the tips you're going to see out on the Jet community may talk about building the report with this function or the general ledger function. I believe they basically get you to the same place. So I'm going to go ahead and click Table Builder. It's a quirk of Table Builder that it actually opens up a second Excel file that you're actually building into. The first step is to tell the system what table you're reading. So what Jet does is it goes out to your database and pulls information from a table. And then when you refresh it, it goes and re-pulls that information in so that you're not having to take the information and dump it into Excel yourself and do that over and over again. What that means is you need to know what table to look at. So in general, there are just a handful of tables you're probably going to use. There are a lot of tables in NAV, and many of them are ones that OneNFP doesn't even use. Generally, these are going to be pretty logical, though, in what you're looking at. So if we go to the software for just a second, and we go to History, and your general ledger entries, this is everything that's posted to your general ledger. This is what you would see if you drilled down from your chart of accounts. You'd be seeing general ledger entries. So if we look for a table, GL entry, that's the same table. If we wanted to look at vendor ledger entries, there's a vendor ledger entry table. So I believe you will be able to find the tables that you're looking for. If you have questions, though, please go ahead and send an email to support@onenfp.com and we'll help you out. So this first report, I'm actually going to build a few so we can go through the process a few times. I'm going to use the general ledger entry table. Now, what it shows me now is every field that is on that table, and there are a lot of fields on the table. Again, there are going to be fields that you don't use and that OneNFP doesn't use, but you'll be able to see, okay, I want amount, let's see, I want the GL account number, I want fund. Remember, this is transaction level data, so I have that detail. I have my dimensions, cost center, in my sample data I have cost center and program, so I can bring those in. Let's see, I think I want posting date and document number, and that's pretty good for this one. And then down here you're going to see flow fields. So these are the general tables with strict data in them. Flow fields are a little different. Most of the time they're transactional calculating fields. On this particular table, they actually create a connection to the general ledger account name. So I want to go ahead and include that because I want to have both my account number and my account name. Now, here's where I show you why I like the table builder. It lets you move your fields around because this is the order the information is going to come through when you produce your report. So I like that. It gives me the flexibility to move stuff around. Let's see. Let's go ahead and add description too. All right. So I've got my information. I'm going to have my amount, document number. I've got my funds, my dimensions. Now let's talk about filtering. When I click the table, over here I get filters and I can define filters for the report. There's a couple of different types of filters. So first off, I know I'm going to want to filter by account number. And in my case, for this, let's keep it to my expense accounts. This JET respects all the same filtering tips and tricks that you use in Microsoft or in OneNFP Financials. So for a range, I have, if I click over here in user defined, that means my user is going to be able to change the filter, enter a filter when they run the report. There may be times when you don't want them to do that, in which case you'd leave that unchecked. So, all right, I'm double checking my notes, so hang on just a second. All right, everything I wanted to do with this first report, so I'm going to go ahead and create that. So this is what it looks like when it's just the coding. And I want to show you, it's got a line here for headers and a line here for fields. The field is showing you the actual field name, and it needs to stay the same. You can't change this. But the header actually is the header that's going to show when you produce the report. So if I want this, I want to take off the GL because I think that doesn't need to be there, let's say. I can do that in the header line. I can't do that in the field line or it's going to break the report. And you can see up here some information about my filter. So if I go ahead and refresh this, it's going to pull. I could change my filter here. It's going to pull all my information out of that GL entry table into this report. And this could be my report just all I want, in which case every time I refresh it, I'm going to get my data. And unfortunately, GoToMeeting is slowing me down just a little bit. It normally wouldn't take this. But I will tell you, when you're creating your own reports, if it takes a long time to pull, that might be a clue that you're pulling too much information and you want to think about how you're doing that report. Maybe restrict by posting date, something like that. So here's how the information comes in. It comes in with filters for Excel. I can filter by account number. It gives me some nice features. If I scroll to the bottom, well, I guess it would explain why it took so long. I've got a fair bit of information there. Let's scroll to the very bottom. I've got totals. So that's a fairly basic report. We're going to go ahead and move to, I apologize, one moment. Hang on a second. Sorry about that, folks. My cell phone almost never rings, and I forgot to put it on silent. All right, so that's a basic report. I'm going to go back through and put in some additional functionality and a little bit more complex report. But let's stop for a moment and see if there are any questions. And go ahead and if you have questions, type them in the chat window. All right.
So I had a question.
Yeah, if you could use the chat window.
Okay.
I'd like to keep everybody muted to keep the background noise down. I'm certainly contributing enough of my own background noise. All right, can we get a map of the tables and fields? I will give you a list of the tables that you are likely to use. As I said, there are about a handful that are the most commonly used. And the fields generally are fairly obvious, but I can look into if we can get a list of the fields as well. Jet seems to disappear. Hang on one second. Jet seems to disappear whenever I restart Excel. That I'm going to have to talk to the Jet folks about. That has not been my experience. I would definitely say we need to look to make sure that the version of Excel you are on matches the versions that are listed on the Jet Express page, the operating system and the Excel version. All right, and let's move down. Next question. Can Jet Report be downloaded onto a Mac? It can be downloaded to, well, let's go back to that page. I believe it is, looks like it's only supported in Windows. All right, so let's move to my next example. So that was a fairly basic report. I'm just dumping my information. I listed what accounts, and I had it had just a simple single filter. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to create another report. And this time I'm going to look at the GL account table. This is the same. Hi, we're going to try and mute everybody. If you've called in, if you could mute yourself so we can control the background noise. Sorry. So the GL account table, this is the same table that you see when you go to your GL accounts. If you go to your list of accounts, this is that same table. So I'm going to include the number and the name. And the reason I wanted to do this particular one is to show you the flow fields. Remember I talked about flow fields being really more calculated information most of the time than what we saw with the GL account name on the GL entry table. So here I can actually add actuals and budget. Whoops, I guess I only need to add it once. Financials clients also have provisional and statistical entries and encumbrance entries. You could add those. I'm going to keep it simple and just do actual and budget. And I think that's all I wanted to do with this particular report. Let's pull that. So fairly straightforward on that one, but I wanted to show you how that would work. So here I'm pulling in my actual and my budget information. So that's another type of report. So keep an eye on what flow fields are available. All right, so one more report, and now we're going to start getting into more of the complexity, the kinds of things you can do. So this time I'm going to go back to the GL entry table. All right. And let's see, I know I want amount, I know I want GL account number, I know I want the name. Let's see, I want fund, I want description, I want my dimensions. And you'll see as I'm doing this, it's a find as you type, which is quite nice. That you're not having to scroll through. So you're going to want to know what your dimension names are, because you'll see it's not filtering by the number or anything with the word dimension. It's using my dimension name itself. All right. Now another thing I wanted to point out with general ledger entries. Let's move over to the general ledger entries for a second. If I look at the entries on the screen, there's a couple of fields here, source type and source number. So that tells you where the information is coming from. In this case, the first ones we're seeing here came through the bank account subledger. The report I want to build this time, I actually want to look at my GL entries for vendors. When we post vendor invoices, the invoice information at a high level posts to the vendor ledger entry, but the detail level, the line-by-line pieces of the invoice, those post directly to the GL entry table. So I want to look at my vendors line by line of what I'm charging them or what they're charging me for. So one of the things I want to do, though, that general ledger entry table has a lot of information in it, and not all of it is related to vendors. So if I actually learn how to spell, learn how to type more like, if I filter on source type, now I can reduce what I'm pulling from that general ledger entry table to get only those entries that posted through the vendor subledger. Okay, so I'm only going to get my vendor ledger entries. That's one of those filters that I may not want my users to change. So I'm going to leave that blank. Let's see, I'm going to want them to filter on the GL account. So I'm going to make that a user-defined filter. I want them to filter on posting date. So I'm going to make that a filter. You can have as many filters as you like, and that mix of whether they're user-defined or system-defined or unchangeable. So I want to include source number, because that's going to tell me my vendor number. Now that I know I'm only filtering to bring in vendor entries, I want to bring in the source number. One of the extra things that you can do, I'm going to add a table. You can add information from another table as long as you can make a connection between what the entries are. So if I bring in the vendor table, this will make sense in just a second, I hope. We know the source number. If we look back at the ledger entries, the source number, that's going to be the vendor number. Okay? So source number is the same thing as the vendor number on the vendor table. So I'm adding the vendor. I need to say when the vendor number is the same as the source number, that's when we know we've made a connection. So we have to tell it how to know what the vendor number is. But when I do that, now I can add the vendor name. So I'm going to have my source number, which is vendor number on the GL entry, and the vendor name. So that's helpful because not everybody knows who the vendors are based on the number. All right, let me look at my notes, make sure I got everything I wanted to include in this report. And all right, let's go ahead and pull that in. It's going to be very much like what we just saw. It's going to, please tell me I clicked OK. There we go. There we go. Just took a second to pull in. Jay is asking if I can do that step again where I link the tables. Sure. Let me circle back and I'll do it at the end of this. I'll do that, walk through that again. So let's, okay, so we've got the information. All of this coding, this is the technical stuff that JET needs to know to pull the report. you're going to get pretty familiar with reading what all that means. If we look at it, we're looking at the GL entry table. There are headers, the table name, we've got filters. One of the nice things, we've got this detail stuff though. If I want, I can delete this thing here where it says table, and I can actually move this to another tab of my report. This has to stay in the file, but it doesn't have to be something that your users see. Instead, you can put it onto another tab and click refresh, and it's going to pull in to this tab. So they're only seeing this information. I produced a report for another client. I actually had several of these, so they were all on one tab looking at several different tables. So let's go back to design mode. And I'm going to move this back over here for a second because it's going to be helpful in what I want to show next. All right, so we talked about the header. We talked about the fields. One of the things you can do, whoops, I didn't want to widen that much. We've got our fields. What if you forgot a field? So, gee, I think I want posting date in here. I can actually insert posting date. You need to know the field name. So posting date, this is the header. So this is the column header. It doesn't matter what I put there. What I put here, though, you need to know what that field name is because it needs to know what to pick up. The other thing you need to do is you need to make sure when it's looking at the columns that it goes all the way out. So all of our columns are listed out to column N, all of our fields. We need to make sure that that gets added in. So if I added another field, so let's say I put in fund class over here at the end of this list in column O, meaning I want to pull in the fund class from the transaction, but I come over here. Notice how this is only looking at the columns out here. So know that you can add fields after you've built this, but you need to make sure that the table knows to pick those fields up, that this command up here, I'd have to change that to O so that it knows to pick that up. Change that and that. And I messed that up. Hold on a second. Oh, I'm putting in the number 0 and not the letter O. That would be the problem. My point is, know that you can do that. Let me change that back. Okay. All right. So I can do that. I can also do the same thing with a filter. So if I wanted to add a filter in here, remember I talked about some are user-defined and some are not. This hide an option, that's the distinction. Hide means the user's not going to enter the filter when you run it. Option means they will. And posting date, document number. Let's do document number. I want to point out document number isn't one of the values that I've pulled into my report. You don't have to filter on values that you've pulled into the report. As long as it's on the table, that's what it's filtering. But same trick down here, the coding that's telling JET how to do things, it doesn't know yet about this. So what I need to do is find filters. Filters here is saying it goes from C5 to D7. C5 to D7. I need to change that to D8 so that it knows to pick up this whole range. So now when I run the report, when I refresh it, now it's asking for document number, and I can filter on that value. So you have some flexibility when you pull information in. It doesn't have to be everything you need because you can add to it. You just need to know the trick of making sure that the headers, the table, the filters are looking in the right fields. All right, let me look at my notes. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh this. And 114, again, it's the same filtering that we use in Financials and Financials Lite, ... is going to give me a range. So let's reduce it to that. So here we have our vendor name. That's pulling in because we linked our source name. We could change that header in the coding. We could change that to say vendor number. We're only seeing vendor number because we filtered on the source type being vendor. So we were only pulling in the vendor entries. And gee, I've got all my due to, due froms. So that's a time where I probably would want to filter. When I filter this, let's refresh it and look only at my expense accounts. So let's do a quick rerun. This is what your managers are going to be able to do. They're going to be able to filter, do all this without ever entering the system if you want them to. All right, another trick I want to show you is doing a pivot table. The main trick is you need to be showing, you have to have run the report and have data here, and then you can insert a pivot table. And it will put it you're going to want it on a new worksheet, basically. I am really bad at pivot tables, though, so I'm just going to show you the basic function that you can do it. I'm not going to get into trying to teach you pivot tables because I think most of you on the call could teach me pivot tables and run circles around me with pivot tables. I just wanted to show you that. I ran into this myself when I was trying to do a pivot table. I actually had it in design mode when I was trying to do the insert, and it wouldn't work because the pivot table just didn't know how to reference what it was doing. So you have to have refreshed and have entries here when you create that pivot table. All right, I've got another piece I wanted to show you. Actually, let's stop here for a second for questions and see how we're doing, because I have not been paying any attention over here. So I just threw a whole bunch of more advanced stuff at you, and I will circle back and go through it again another time. But questions? I feel like I'm flying through this faster than I intended to. I maybe should not have had the caffeine Diet Coke before I started this call. All right. How do you update a sheet you have already started? So do you mean, Brent, do you mean how do I add a column or something to what I've already created? Or okay, let's go. So let's go through that again. So I need to be on my jet. I need to be in design mode. So I'm going to click design here. So I'm going to add, let's see, let's add document number, okay? So let's go back over here for a moment. And, where is it? It's not showing on this particular screen. Oh, wait, yes it is, if I come over here. So document number. This is going to be a big clue to you to tell you what the column or what the field is that you want to pull information from. So let's put in document number. Let's actually spell it correctly. So this is my header. Remember, the header and the fields are different. The header you can change, the field you can't. So I'm going to add in document number over here. While I'm at it, let's go ahead and change source number to vendor number. Remember, I can't change it here because it needs to know what field I'm taking information from. So now I'm going out to column O. So I come here and click on the field that says table when you're in design mode. That's what's holding all of the coding for the instructions to pull information with JET. Now, because I did that example before, we're already showing it, but I would need to make sure that where it says headers and where it says table GL entry is pointing to the right column. So you see how this blue ties to this blue? This is Excel coding telling it what columns to look at to know what fields to pull in. So it is going out to column O. And the header also needs to go out to column O. Okay, so that would be adding a field. Brent, did that help? Brent, no, you can't just reopen Table Builder. That's one of the restrictions on the Express level versus Enterprise or Essentials, which are the other two JET levels of programming available. Table Builder, it would just open up a new form. That was a good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it is a difference in Excel, and you can't just reopen Table Builder. Did I see another question come in? Okay, Amy, can you show totals by vendor, by cost center? So let's take a look at running this, what it does with the totaling when I do that. All right, so let's scroll down to the bottom. All right, this one is just putting in the total on, I'm not sure why it's totaling on document number. I think it will total on the last column you have. You can certainly add a total. Oh, there's the total by amount. If you were filtering by cost center, you could certainly filter down to just see one specific cost center. When it comes to being able to mix and match, that would fall into, I think what I would do is some kind of pivot table. And that's where I'm not sure I could really show you how to do that with a pivot table because I'm just lousy with pivot tables. But that's what I would probably do is you have your dump of information, and certainly you can filter when you're in here. But if you're over here, let's say, so let's go ahead and put in so I've got pretty limited information in this sample database. But in this case, it would be showing me by cost center how much I spent for this vendor, the pivot table. So there's a lot of that subtotaling that you're going to get with a pivot table. And again, I just really am not good at talking about Excel pivot tables. All right. So let's see, any other questions? All right, I did want to show you one more place you can go to start learning about things you can change, or one more area that you might touch. Let's go back to design mode. All right, if I go in to this function wizard, which I rarely use, again, there are probably powered JET users that use the function wizard alone to create their table. You're going to see this is very similar to all that information we saw when you're on the table in here. It's pulling that same information. There are features here that you can add in to the way the report is created. Some of them are ones, headers, there's already a line in there. You can add the filters there is. You can, let me widen this, that will help. Hide totals is one I want to point out. That's one I've used. Read through these. There are functions for totaling, things like that start getting into advanced reporting. Hide totals is an easy one for me to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and make that true. So now when I get this report and I refresh it, the totals that we saw at the bottom have gone away, because there may be a reason, it depends on the kind of report you're pulling. You may not want it totaling, or you may. Depends on the report. So I'm going to pause a bit. I'm going to check for questions. All right, let's see. Brent, can you restrict other users, department heads, so they cannot create a table themselves because they would need to have JET added? To run these, they all are going to need JET. I believe you can just distribute the information to people if they don't have JET. They wouldn't be able to refresh it, though. You wouldn't be able to restrict them to build their own reports and to run their own tables, but JET does respect the user access rules in OneNFP Financials. So let's say you have a manager who is only allowed to see program code 1000. When they pull this in, it will filter those out automatically. It respects those rules. So what you'd want to do, again, all the users have to be set up as users in OneNFP. They can be limited users, but they have to be users in OneNFP. And then you can write a user access rule that restricts what they can see. All right. And Devani, from where can we access the saved reports? So that's going to be my next step. So let me show you. You can save your report anywhere you want to. So let's go ahead and save this report. I'm just going to stick it on my desktop. Let's actually type well. All right, I'm going to call it Jessica's new report. Okay? Let's go ahead and close this. And here's that report. But one of the things that we gave you with when I sent out earlier in the year the JET reports that we give you, the 3 initial starting reports, is this report player. This is completely optional, but what's nice is you can put all of your reports in a single location and they'll show up here. So right now I just have 3 basic reports. So let's close that. And if I open up Documents, My Reports, here's where we're seeing the JET information. This is where JET is looking. So if I move this new report that I created into this folder, now when I open up the report player, come on, open report player, and I scroll through, there's my new report. Okay? This can be any Excel file you have. This does not have to have anything whatsoever to do with JET. It doesn't have to be something that's built to refresh from JET. This just can give you a nice access to all of your reports. And let's show you another trick. So this is the default icon you get for any report. But if you see these ones, these actually look like the report that we create. So let's go ahead and open this report. And I'm going to take a quick screenshot of the report. It's going to be kind of ugly because I'm not taking my time with it. And put this into Paint. Now if I save this, and I go back to Documents, that same folder that the report viewer is looking at, and My Reports. Remember, we put the report in Reports. If I put this image, I have to give it the same name as the report. So let's look at the file for a second. So again, we're in Documents, My Reports. In Reports, I've added an Excel file called Jessica's New Report. In Images, I have an image called Jessica's New Report. Now, when I open up the report player, the icon I get looks like that report. It gives me a preview. It's a static image file, so it's not going to update as you refresh the report, but it gives you something there. Another nice little feature here, if I press F2, whoops, nope, I turn it around. Okay, here I can have some detail on the report, and if I press F2 here, I can add some information there for your users. So just some nice features there with the report player. All right, let me go back to my notes, make sure I've got everything I wanted to tell you here. Okay, again, this is optional. In general, if you are creating JET reports, you can save the Excel anywhere you need it to be saved to whatever folder you need to. But if you want to use the report player, it needs to go into that My Reports folder. All right, so going back to we access saved reports. Okay, Amy, is there repeat by functionality to show cost centers as separate columns? Let me think about how that would be built. So if we go back into this report, what you want to see is each cost center as its own column. I think that would be done through a pivot table. Once you pull the information in, I think the pivot table would give you that ability. In fact, let's go look at the pivot table I created for this. If I put cost center up here as a column, yes, I only have, again, this is limited. Let's do program code, I think, has a few more variety. So I'm getting my columns, my cost centers as columns there. So the pivot table will pull that. The report will pull it into one column because it's one field on the table. But the pivot table will give you that ability to separate by column. All right, more questions? All right, so I'm going to circle back. Brent, let me show you that linking function again, just to reiterate, because that is a handy thing to know how to do. Again, I'm going to go to Table Builder. I'm going to pick my GL entry table. Let's pull in amount and source number and GL account. And then we've got GL entry, that's what it's looking at. Now we need to tell it that JET also needs to look at, in this case, the vendor table. So vendor table. By default, it's trying to figure out what's the connection between these two tables, and it isn't always going to be right. Sometimes it will. In this case, we know source number is the vendor number. So we want to tell it when the vendor number is the same as the source number on the GL entry table, then we know there's a connection. Then it knows what vendor name, so I'm adding vendor name, that's when it's going to know that vendor 100 in my table, the GL entry table, is Acme Office Supplies in my vendor list. Okay, did that help, Brent? Okay. Other questions? So you can create as many JET reports as you need. Okay, this comes with your subscription. Again, this is JET Express. You can also work with us, and we would then involve the JET consulting team to build reports for you. So you may not want to take the time to learn all this, and quite honestly, the JET team knows miles and miles more than I do. But you can work with us, so if you're interested in that, you can let us know. That's certainly one great way you could go about having your managers get reports without ever being in the system, and you might want to have them build them. Just know that you can contact us. Again, there may be reports that you want that can't be accomplished with Express, because Express is the baseline product that JET produces. So then we would have to talk about whether you'd want to increase your JET subscription to add on the ability to use other features. You don't have to. So, all right, Brent. Consistently getting errors when having more than 3 fields to pull from. Brent, why don't I circle back with you after this call, and we can take a look at and see if I can figure out what's going on with that. All right. Emily, have I missed any questions?
No, I think you've covered everything that's been in the chat window.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I feel like I've sped through this, so I would happily go back and take a look at some of these things. As Emily said, though, we are recording it, so you'll be able to go back and watch me in slow motion. All right. This is the first brown bag. I want to try and do these monthly. So I would tell you guys on the call, if you have things you would like to see, let me know, because I'm going to be looking for topics for future. All right. Sabine, you had a question. The second example, not clear, of the addition of flow fields. Okay. All right, so let's go back and go through that one. To finish out what I was saying before, though, I'm going to try and schedule brown bags every month on a certain topic. If you have topic suggestions, please, I welcome them. All right, so let's go back. I'm going to do my table filter. So I'm going to do GL account this time. Basically repeat what we did because I'm not on the fly thinking of another table to look at. So when you define your account, there are all these different pieces to the account itself, the account record, and that's what these table fields are. So I've got number and name, and let's add reporting category. What the heck? So we can filter on expense versus revenue. When I look at the account, though, let's actually go into the account on the record. And of course, I timed out. All right, so if we look at the account itself, let's go to chart of accounts. If we look at an account, these are all pieces of information that are on the table, the number, the name, whether it's the reporting category, if I wanted to have defaults, created by, that information. This is calculated. It's a calculated field, and this underline tells me I can drill down. That's usually a good sign that what you're looking at is a flow filter. So if we go back over here and click flow filters here in the table builder, instead of being fields and tables, we're looking at the flow filter. That's where I can get to those calculated fields. So in this case, I want to add actual and budget. That's calculated based on what's posted to this account. It's actually not part of the account definition. Okay, Sabine, did that help? Okay, great. All right, so we're coming towards the end. If there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, feel free to email support at onenfp.com with questions, and send me your suggestions for future brown bags. And thank you very much.